Welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast, where your host, Josh Sweeney, will give you, the business leaders, HR professionals, and company culture aficionados, the knowledge you need to take your company culture to the next level.
Hello, my name is Josh Sweeney, and welcome to the Epic Company Culture Podcast. Before I get started, I would like to thank Prototype Prime for this amazing podcast space. Today, I'm joined by Rachel Orston of UserIQ. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Josh, it's great to be here.
Yeah, awesome. Well, what I would like to do today is I guess we'll get started by hearing more about you, about UserIQ, and then we'll talk a little bit about company culture.
Let's do it.
All right,
Let's
so
do it.
Tell us about yourself.
Sure. So I'm Rachel Orston. I'm the CEO of UserIQ. We're a digital adoption platform that helps primarily B2B SaaS companies understand and engage with their users so they can guide their users to success. We help companies improve user adoption, onboarding. If users are using more of your product and hopefully getting what they need to get done, they're going to retain, they're going to stay with you, they're going to grow with you, you're going to get more revenue out of them. And so that's the problems that we solve for those companies.
Got it. So you're helping other organizations with the adoption of their software, of their platforms?
Absolutely, with adoption and ultimately retention and expansion and advocacy. Because if you can't get adoption going, if you can't get users really to use your product to solve a business problem, they're not going to stay with you and they're not going to become advocates and they're not going to expand. So it really starts with getting that foundation strong.
Awesome. Well, we've talked about it on the show before, all about the perception, how company culture expands into your customer's perception of you. So how do you feel that the software really helps all of your customers, convey their culture, convey that they really care about that user experience? How does that translate to the users for your clients?
Well, it's a really good question, and I think part of really our unique differentiation is that we care about our users. We care about our customers. We're not just all about our customer. We want to make our customers successful, but we want to make our customers successful. So there's like an extension of that. And in doing so, I think it's really important that our customers make their customers feel heard. And to the extent that they can, create a very personalized experience for that individual user. And that's hard to do. Many of our customers have like tens of thousands of users. So the problem becomes, how do you do that? How do you do that at scale? How do you do that when I'm a big, fast-growing SaaS company and I have tens of thousands, if not millions of customers, right? How do I make each of them feel like they're getting a great experience? And that's really what UserIQ does. It makes them be able to understand, hear, listen, collect feedback, do custom surveys, and really, to the extent that they can, tailor a really strong experience for those users. And so the more that you could connect with users on an individual basis, which is hard to do, in an application, the more they feel like they're part of your community, the more they feel like they matter. And so that in itself, I think, is a cultural statement that you as a user matter, and that we're going to do everything we can to try to connect and make you feel heard and understood. I love the alignment with what you do for your customers, and what we do and what you work on as well in your own company culture, the experience of your employees, the experience that you're having, what they're going through in the organization. So with that, one thing we like to hear about is your experience from company culture. Right.
So I'll kick it off with the first company culture question, which is, what is the best company culture experience you've had other than UserIQ?
I feel like there's always recency bias when you ask that question because you're shaped by, more of your recent experiences. For me, it's harder. I've been doing this a long time, so it's harder for me necessarily like pull back a couple decades ago. But I would say my best cultural experience was at Silverpop. Bill Nussey is the CEO. He happens to also be an investor now in UserIQ and a board member. And I'm very lucky that I worked for him for many years, learned from him as a CEO, now being a first-time CEO myself, and feel like I've tried my best to bring a lot of things I really liked about Silverpop's culture into UserIQ. So I would say my biggest cultural lessons learned, both what to do and what not to do, and I think Bill would have his own perspective on that as well, came from my time. I had about a good 6 years at Silverpop prior to joining UserIQ, and then of course there were a couple of years at IBM because Silverpop was bought by IBM, and that was a very big culture change, being a fast-growing company in Atlanta, then being acquired by one of the largest technology companies in the world, right?
Yeah, I went through one of those acquisitions myself
Yeah.
at a security firm that was bought by IBM.
Yes.
So complete change, and been through that a few
Oh,
times.
we could have
So,
many talks over
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of differences there. So
Yeah.
as far as Silverpop, what were some of your most memorable portions, the great experiences that really stood out where you said, I want to replicate that at UserIQ, or I want to replicate that later?
Yeah, there's a couple things that we did, and if there's Silver Poppers in Atlanta listening to this podcast, you might get a smile because this will bring back memories. But Bill loved Halloween, and we did a big deal out of Halloween, and it just became this bigger than. It just kind of grew organically. We did a big Halloween party, and employees were allowed to bring their families. So it was also the stage of life. I think we were, as a company, we had a lot of young people that were starting families, and so there were a lot of young children. And so this idea of really bringing families, it became a family event, and bringing families into the fold from a party perspective in a way that I've not seen companies do, really acknowledging families beyond the traditional holiday party where you bring your spouse, but really saying, hey, Silverpop's really becoming this place where young people are having kids and they're little kids, and how can we kind of bring them into the company in some way? I thought that was very special, and Bill used Halloween as a way to say, look, I get it, you guys have families, you have small children, how can we connect Silverpop to family? So that was number one from a Halloween perspective. But then the second thing was we had a competitive Halloween costume and office decoration competition where it got pretty competitive, where different departments would come up with Halloween themes, and we would completely decorate the halls and the floors, and it got pretty elaborate in terms of the ideas, the execution, the costuming that went in. And it's crazy now to look back at what we did, but it also really I think fostered a lot of camaraderie within the teams. People would start planning a months in advance for this, and it would bring coworkers together, I think, in a way that people wouldn't normally interact around something that's just kind of silly when you think about it. It's decorating the office, costuming, completely different than the day-to-day of our email marketing and what we did. So to me, that whole experience around Halloween was something I had never experienced before. And it was really quite memorable, both from the way we engaged with families on the party, because we did a party at night, and then during the day we had this really fun office kind of contest competition.
Yeah, we try and share a lot about how company culture is the tangibles and the intangibles, right? And the tangibles can be the parties and the events and the ping pong tables and whatever other tangible items are part of it. But you hinted and kind of mentioned on the intangible side of people planning together and collaborating and spending more time. So what do you think the intangible factor of that was? What do you think the outcome was of everybody spending this time together, planning for the events or building their costumes or doing other things, outside their normal day-to-day?
Yeah, it's a tough one for me. I think the intangible, and this very much, and I know you've probably had other people on the podcast, and the conversation's probably gone in this direction. There's been a lot of written work about, is culture about being a family versus the sports team. There's Reed Hastings' article, where he's very much, the Netflix culture is about team versus family. I think, and I think ideally you want a balance of both, right? You want that team sport attitude, but there's some family camaraderie, acknowledgement of families, and I think when I look back at that particular Halloween example, I think for me it was Silverpop's way of balancing both. I think that Silverpop did a good job kind of balancing a family-like atmosphere to some degree with we're a team. How do we compete? How do we come together? And do that in a really fun way where we don't take ourselves. I think Bill, and if you know Bill, this will make sense, but there's a way of doing it not taking yourself too seriously, right? And having fun and trying to have fun in the process. And so I think those were some of the intangibles that came through in how we acted at Silverpop. I think we never took ourselves too seriously. I think we were check your ego at the door. We came together in a very competitive way, like a team sport, but never to an over too much 180 detriment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it wasn't so over competitive, or it didn't go in a direction that was negative, had a negative impact.
Correct. Yeah. And there was an element of fun to the work, where I really would during my 6 years there. I tell people I had so much fun. And it's not often that you characterize your job as that, especially when you're in the email marketing space. I mean, let's be clear, it's like email.
Right.
But I had a ton of fun. And so I think that those were some of the intangibles. And I think most people that worked at Silverpop would probably share a lot of my sentiment. It's easy to look back now and have a bit of, sentiment around it. But it was a lot of fun work.
So with Silverpop having their Halloween party and that being the memorable experience in multiple different ways, do you have something at UserIQ that is really yours?
I've been with the company, so I'm a relatively new CEO. I'm in there about 20 months. And, it's hard because there's maybe what I think is memorable versus what the team would think is memorable. I would say we don't have necessarily an event like the Halloween party that I described with Silverpop, but I do a Monday morning stand-up. And I've gotten a lot of feedback that those stand-ups are really important to the team. And lots of times I'll talk about just my view of what's going on in the market, or I'll talk about a particular leadership topic or where I think the company's going and dealing with a particular challenge that might be having. One of our big culture characteristics is radical candor and transparency. And maybe to a fault, I'm completely open and very direct about where I see us in the market, how I think we're doing. And I think for the team, they would probably say that my 10, 15 minutes every Monday morning, just talking to them, like really personal about what I'm dealing with as a CEO, what my week is like, what I'm thinking, what's top of mind for me, and doing that in like a very open way, like not holding back on stuff, I think for them is probably a meaningful event, which is weird because it's about me. And I hate saying that because I've actually asked them, like, do you guys care about this? Like, maybe I should stop doing this. And they're like, no. Actually, we want you to keep, talk every Monday. And because I've always kept saying, should we pull back from that? Is that working? Do people value it? And it's probably the one thing that people consistently tell me they really look forward to on Monday mornings. So it puts more pressure on me a little bit. So I think I think it speaks to some of our culture, but also I think that's kind of a rhythm and kind of events that we're creating. But we don't have yet. I mean, we do like parties and we have a social committee. We do things every month, but nothing like the Halloween party yet. The bar's really high for that in my mind.
For that event.
Like, I don't think we've gotten there yet.
So, but yours right now, that Monday stand-up is giving a time for you to have your radical candor with the organization, transparency. They know what's going on. They feel like they're in the loop and things just aren't really coming down on high miraculously or anything.
That's right.
They know what the market factors are. So,
and we're small enough that we can do that today. We're small enough that we're 30 some odd people in Atlanta. Now, I also do a separate one with our team in India. We have 7 folks in Bangalore, so I kind of do like another a replay of that for them. And oftentimes I'll even send an email the night before, kind of teasing the topic that I'm going to talk about on Monday, and I'll send that out to the whole company, including our investors. So yeah, and they vary on all different topics, different themes. Yeah.
Very cool. What are some of the other themes? So you said like market research, what's happening in the industry. What are some of the other themes that you like to share?
I'm very candid about accomplishments, so celebrations, and what we can learn from it, and also where we could improve. So I'm a big fan of, like, I don't know if you've read Ray Dalio Principles. Have you read Principles?
It's been a while. Yeah, I have read it, but it's been a while.
It's not everyone's a Ray Dalio fan necessarily, but he's got this concept of pain plus reflection equals progress, right? And so there's this concentric loop of learning. And so we're very much a growth mindset company. And so I'm very big on, like, what can we learn from every challenge, from every setback, and also every accomplishment. And so, like, that pain plus reflection. So especially if we're going through a particularly challenging time figuring out a problem, maybe we're still trying to understand a product fit with some of our product, with an area of our product. It might have been some feedback we got from a customer, positive or negative. Lots of times I'll put that out there in the room and say, this is what's going on, and this is how I'm thinking about it. This is how I'm thinking about how we could respond to this. This is what I'm thinking about the lesson learned. This is what I'm thinking about how this experience could shape our strategy moving forward. So it's very much very specific examples of either what's happening with our customers, what responses we're getting in the market, positive or negative from our product, things of that nature. And I'm also out talking to investors a lot. I think we're in a very hot space, UserIQ. If you think about the whole post-purchase experience, coming out of marketing automation, like Silverpop, right? It's been all like email, customer acquisition, marketing automation, right? But now we've got this whole, like, what do we do with users after they've been acquired, right? After they bought? How do we nurture them? How do we create these great experiences? And the space is, I think, really nascent. I think it's going to be huge, probably bigger even than the marketing automation space. So I am also out talking to investors. And so I'll bring back a lot of investor perspectives to the business. I'll be like, well, this is what investors are telling me they think about the space. So it's stuff like that I'll bring back into the room so that people feel connected to what I'm hearing, what I'm learning, especially like the development team or necessarily like the sales team. They wouldn't necessarily know what I'm talking about with investors, for example, or
right.
So.
Yeah, I know we follow Traction, the whole EOS model, and we have cascading messages from our level 10 meeting, and we've always looked at, how do we provide more value to the entire team? And I like the idea of how am I thinking about it? What am I hearing? What is the translation on that, or the other things that I'm dealing with? So I think it just adds, like you said, that candor and transparency so the team really has a good idea of what's going on. And then, what I've also found is when you tell the team those types of things, when you're more transparent, when you're more candid, they come up with solutions for you.
Absolutely.
So they solve the problem.
Absolutely. And it's not uncommon for them. I think it's also, I worry sometimes that people see the CEO running around, meeting to meeting to meeting. Like, they're very busy people,
Right.
like I'm on the phones, I'm on calls, I'm popping in and out of my office. And I worry that, I never want to be that person where people are like, what does she do all day? Like, well, what conversations is she having? Like, I know Rachel's busy, but
Right.
like, what does that really mean? And so for me, I really want people to know, like, this is what I'm doing all day. Like, this is how my week went. And by doing so, I want people to feel like I am more accessible. And I have a lot of our employees, and we're still a small company. I mean, we're 40 people, so we are pretty open, and I want that to be the way it should be. And what I like about it too is it invites people to come to me I have a very open door policy, so it invites people to say, hey, can I talk to you about what you talked about? And can I get 5 minutes on your calendar to ask you a few questions? Absolutely. Like, that's what I want. I want curiosity. I want people to say, I thought about what you said on Monday. Can I ask you a few other questions about that? Sure. Yeah. Let's talk about it. Like, to your point, how can you help us solve it? Or do you have a different idea of another way we could look at it? And those ends up being the conversations that I have with our employees that really get me excited and help me engage with them in a different way than maybe I normally would.
Yeah, I can definitely see that in it. And also, from my experiences, just having them come to you with those questions, that they were hearing it. That it was engaging, that they were thinking about it, and you weren't just standing up talking for 10 or 15 minutes and then, went off about your day.
That's
because, they're coming back to you. They're
That's
providing
right.
that feedback.
That's right. Well, and if you think about it too, I mean, look, we're an early stage company. Like, people who choose to do this. Like, think about it. Like, you're choosing an early stage venture. You're choosing the messiness. You're choosing the uncertainty. You're choosing the risk. Many of them are choosing pay decreases, right? So you're making a lot of sacrifices to some degree, depending on how you look at it, to take a bet in an early stage venture. And so I think in many respects, it's a responsibility that you have, because these are people that have made career bets in this particular company. And I take that really seriously. I mean, we're really lucky because we have a very, really interesting, hiring profile. We hire, obviously, like, we look for very high performers, people who are you and I were talking about before we started recording about, motivation. I mean, these are people who take their work really seriously, who want to make a big contribution. And so that idea of connectedness, I think, matters a ton, especially at this early stage, because this is why these people made this decision. If they wanted to go be like sit in a cube somewhere and, just be part of the machine, like, they go back to, they go work for some Joe Big company, right?
Right.
So but they chose this. So how are you going to respond? What's your role as a CEO, I think, to respond to that commitment?
Yeah. I love what you were saying about, what they're really sacrificing and what they're there for. I think that could be a clip for new hiring, just to get people on board, let them know what they're going to be working with. I'm going to switch gears real quick to a culture experience that was memorable, but in a more negatively impactful way. So you don't have to name any names.
Yeah.
But what was the one thing culturally that's happening, or company culture that you were a part of, that you just said, I don't want that at UserIQ. I don't want that to happen again, or I don't want to work for a company that has that as part of their experience?
Yeah. So I thought about this question and how to answer it. So, and in the spirit of my my commitment to radical candor and transparency, I will say that over the last 2 years that I've been with UserIQ, we've had a lot of strategic interest in the business. And that's exciting because we love that there's other bigger companies out there that love what we're doing and are interested in us. And when I worked for Silverpop, it was the same way. We had a lot of strategic interest in the business in the time that I was there. And so lots of big companies would come knocking on the door, talk to the leadership team, which I was a part of. Ultimately, obviously, we went with IBM. But it was, getting to that point, there were a lot of people that came to the dance, right? And in the same way, UserIQ's also had a couple folks knock on the door. And there was one particular experience, I won't say when it was or who it was, where I was talking to the leadership team of a particular Silicon Valley, large, very well-established business. And they were, it was the entire leadership team in this room, and I was out in the Bay Area. I was on their turf, in their boardroom with their leadership team. And they were kind of grilling me on the business, and I won't say when it was, but they were grilling me on what I was doing and what was going on. And I could tell by the questioning and by the dynamic in the room that have you ever been in a conversation where you could tell, Josh, that like people are trying to, they're not even talking to you, they're trying to show each other up in the room, right?
Their egos are competing against each other.
Exactly. So I'm in this meeting, and again, these are all, let's kind of say what it is. Like I actually looked up a lot of these guys' and girls, women's profiles prior to going into this meeting, so I knew the people I was meeting with and their backgrounds. Overwhelmingly like Stanford grads, like MBAs, like great, histories, many of them at like top other tech firm. I mean, so stellar resumes, right? These people are incredibly smart and bright, like really smart people. But you could tell in the way they interacted with each other and with me that it was very much a show of who could one-up, who could stump me the most and who could kind of, I could feel the tension in the room and the competitive nature between them. Like they didn't talk to each other. Like even like their interaction, like they cut each other off. They were very rude. They interrupted one another and like spoke over one another. I didn't sense that there was like a lot of respect in the room. And here I was actually really excited to meet with these people. I had no idea where the meeting would go and ultimately where the opportunity would go. But I'm thinking, geez, I'm sitting here with some of the most, like, these are some really talented, again, looking at their resumes, really smart people. And they were. But the way they interacted with one another and the way they interacted with me was really, I left that meeting. It's funny, I spoke to my husband later that night, and he was like, from my hotel room, he's like, how did it go? And I'm like, they asked some really good questions, and like they did stump me. Like it definitely was a really it was a grilling kind of meeting, but I left really like with a bad taste in my mouth. And he was like, "Why?" I was like, "You could just tell that it's just such a competitive environment. Like they were just trying to eat each other up a little bit in the room, and it really just left a very bad impression." And since then, it's interesting, since that meeting, there had been a lot of turnover, and I later found out that there was a lot of infighting. And I think that there are some cultures where they do, I think there is a philosophy that some companies subscribe, which is high performance happens when you get people in that, like that's a good tension. Like get people internally competing with each other, you get the best. Supposedly you get the best out of people when you have that healthy kind of internal competition. And I never subscribe to that. I don't believe in that. I don't really get that at all. It's not in my DNA. And I think seeing that play out in that meeting was really just left me very negative feeling about the company. And frankly, I was really glad that we didn't end up doing anything.
Definitely. Yeah, I've definitely seen various situations, on boards of advisors and things like that, where, people are really trying to show each other up as opposed to get value, a value that they need out of it. Because really, it was not to stump you. The goal probably wasn't to stump you. It was to get information from you and find out whether it's a fit and what you guys are doing. But in the challenge with each other, I don't even see how you can pay attention quite as much as you would need to, or
That's
ask
right.
the most pertinent question.
That's right.
If you're just
That's
challenging the other
That's
person.
Right. And I remember too in this particular meeting, it was interesting. I had a follow-up meeting, and there was the CFO was in the room, and he was pretty quiet the whole time. And he was probably one of the more senior people in the room in terms of like age, experience. And I could tell he was almost embarrassed. Like I could tell that he was seeing what was going on. And I met with him later one-on-one, and he didn't like apologize,
Right.
but he kind of did. He was like, I felt like that meeting was a bit intense, and I hope it went over well with you. And I could tell that the questioning was people were kind of talking over one another, and I could tell that he was fumbling through it. But that was his way of saying, I kind of know what was going on there,
Right.
and I kind of agree that wasn't like a great experience for you.
Yeah, I know we see that in some of our customers. We almost always get one person that really just kind of seems to know what's going on. And when they know what's going on and they want to explain it to us, so we'll go meet with the executive team and we can kind of feel the dynamic.
Yeah.
You know something's happening, and then this one person always kind of pulls you off and like, let me give you the breakdown. This is all confidential, but
Right.
here's what's going on. Help me fix it.
That's right.
So there's different ways that each company tries to fix those challenges.
That's right.
So,
And I think when you're talking acquisition too, I think people also go in fear mode. Like when like if they're looking at another company, they're kind of also, I think those leaders get very insecure and they're like, well, what will that mean to me? And
Right.
I want to puff up my feathers and make sure that people know where I am. Like all sorts of weird stuff comes out.
yeah. Or I uncovered the most important thing for that acquisition. So it's more of a credit type of situation.
Yes, totally, Josh. Yeah.
So last thing, at UserIQ, what is the biggest company culture challenge that you're looking at taking on or changing or initiating going into the new year?
Okay. So this one's an interesting one, and it's a real one that I'm dealing with right now. So we're growing. We've more than doubled. We were at the ATDC, so we're like, think of 14 people on top of each other,
Right.
down at Georgia Tech, and now we're in a Buckhead space that we're subleasing, and we've now we're again a little over 30 folks, and we're growing a lot more next year. So we've had a great year, and I anticipate we're going to have an even better year next year, and that's going to be more employees. One of the things that I'm struggling with is we're in this really cool kind of open collaborative space, and everyone's kind of in one open room, and developers, sales, blah, blah, blah. And I recently did an employee survey, which I'm going to share with you after this because I'd love to get your feedback on it. And overwhelmingly, it was really positive. But one of the things that came out of it that really surprised me was people are not happy with the space. And a couple things emerged. We've got this issue of developers sitting, in an open space with sales. So there's this quiet, kind of dark,
Right.
environment that the
Familiar.
developers really want. So, and then there's sales and marketing, phones. And so, and I know this happens all the time, but it's one that I'm really dealing with. Like, it's a cultural thing too, because what's happening, and this is the one thing that surprised me the most, is, and I guess now there's articles written about the benefit of open spaces versus not. I think in our case, because it is such an open space, literally no walls. I mean, we're all in open tables. There's no cubes. There's no partitions. And I think sometimes some of the things that came out in the survey too is that people feel almost like they can't talk because like everyone's listening. Like they can't have like a sidebar conversation because it's like they're in front, they're on stage in front of everybody in the office. And so that was really interesting to get that feedback and how people felt about the open space. Felt like, I heard some very specific, criticisms like, don't feel like I can have open conversations necessarily, and I don't feel like I have a place to go because it's still a small space. Like we don't have a lot of breakout rooms and things like that. There was comments about, just the environment, like quiet versus loud, feeling like developers wanted a certain way. And so I think one of my big challenges, and it's interesting, so our sublease is up in June. So we've been in this really cool space in Buckhead for 2 years. I can't believe it's been 2 years since we moved out of ATDC. And now, once again, I got to think about space. But it was great timing to do this survey because I'm like, oh, this is actually a bigger challenge than I thought. In my mind, I'm like, oh, I just have to go find new space. And in my mind, I'm like, oh, I'll just find more open space because this is working. But it's not necessarily working based on what I heard from the survey. So I'm like, oh, I really have to now think about space differently in a way that I didn't think I was going to have to do looking at new. So that's a big challenge. It sounds very specific, like not that exciting, but space is a big deal to people. Like, especially if they're working long hours in a building all day and they're commuting, making that space really conducive to productivity is something I want to really focus on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've actually started finding space more and more interesting over time as I've visited spaces and got certain feelings when I walk into those spaces or when I work from them, because I've seen the same thing where the evolution was, lots of space where everybody's cordoned off, right? Private offices, dev was over here, sales was over here, and there's lots of walls. And then we went to this open space where everybody's in the same space.
Right.
And now we had Jeff Pollock on, who's a commercial real estate agent, does real estate for a lot of tech companies. And where he said that he sees it is going is they're actually pulling back and trending towards more cordoned off spaces than we are at now. But instead of it being dedicated, it's flex space. So instead of somebody's corner office, it's a collaboration space. It's the phone booth rooms that you get at the co-working spaces. It's ways for other people to still go collaborate in a great way, or it's ways of separating people, but not with a door or with a full wall. So there's all kinds of things that people are doing. And I know many months ago, I went to visit a friend of mine's company, Red Pepper, up in Nashville. Mm-hmm. And they had this concept that I've talked about before on the podcast around work modes. And it talks about the various different work modes that people go through in a day. Are they at a sit-down desk in a cube? Are they in an open area? Are they in a beanbag? Are they in a room where you can't see out of it and there's no visual distractions? So I think they had 8 or 10 different work modes that they've identified and built into their space, which was just a really cool way to think about it. And when I visited, I could really get that feeling because they had these big open areas where they would just move a wall, and they did a very cost-effective wall where it blocked off that room. You could still get in and out, but then if you moved the whole wall, it would just open up into this big expanse.
Right, the space.
And it was like, wow, this is awesome. People have put tremendous amounts of thought into space. So I look forward to hearing about your new space and what that's going to look like.
I appreciate it. Yeah, because the next time, we were lucky to get a 2-year, but the next space will probably be a longer time commitment. So it's a big deal, right? We're probably going to be in this space for, 2, 3, 4 years. So we need to be thoughtful about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
It's my pleasure. I had fun. Thank you.
It's great to have you.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on the Epic Company Culture Podcast. This has been an interview with Rachel Orston of UserIQ. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Epic Company Culture Podcast with Josh Sweeney. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. For additional content and transcripts, visit epicculture.co. If you have questions or topics you would like us to address or expand on, tweet us at epicculture1 or email at podcast@epicculture.co.